You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, this is Dr. Alex G. And I was recently on a guest of a podcast that's called ExtraTextual, and with two filmmakers, Eli and Jeremy. And we had a discussion about the movie Black Panther. The whole nation, whole world's talking about it. And they just had some interesting questions for me. And I just thought, we'd sort of redo some of those questions and I process it with them.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Alex.
Sure.
We just wanted to ask you about the film, us being two white guys, and we were going to definitely talk about the film.
You guys are white?
Yeah, it's got this
you can't,
pasty pink stuff.
Can't see it on the radio.
Okay. Oh, man, this is a setup. Okay, I'm sorry. Oh, man.
I know. So we have been working towards bringing some more diversity to our podcast in general, trying to get some more female guests besides just a bunch of men as well, and also people of color.
Sure.
So we appreciate that. So we're talking about Black Panther, and we just saw it last night, actually, Jeremy and I.
It's true.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. But my first question is, this being, in the Marvel universe, what was, like, maybe growing up your favorite superhero, or do you have a favorite superhero now?
Oh man, that's a great question. My mom was really into Marvel. She collected comic books. I just sort of stayed on the light end. Like I like Casper, Richie Rich, Archie.
Yeah.
So those aren't Marvel. I just sort of hung out in that part of the comic world. But I absolutely. I loved Batman. That's my all-time favorite superhero. So that's where I grew up. I'm a kid of the 60s, 60s and 70s. So that's who I loved growing up.
Is there something about Batman that made you like him, or that?
Again, I watched the television show, so I know him from the TV show, not necessarily the comics. His dry humor, he was witty, and I like the partnership with Robin. But he was strong and compassionate, but yet kind of stoic. But I liked his demeanor. There was something about him that commanded respect. But I always thought Batman was cool, and he always got out of stuff. So no matter how cornered he may have seemed at the time, he always got out. And I waited for that moment. Then I tied towels around my neck and run through the house, jumping on sofas, trying to be like Batman.
Yeah. So speaking of Jeremy and I just seeing the film, we saw it together, and sitting next to us was a mother who was Black with her young son, was pretty young. And so it was cool to see that. I don't know that it was his first theatrical film that he'd seen, but it seemed like it. He was asking a lot of questions, which was fun. And towards the beginning, I heard him say, like, when Black Panther first shows up in his costume, he kind of said, like, is he a hero or a villain?
Wow.
To ask her what was going on. And I also just like little moments when we actually see in Wakanda and everybody's together, there's this African drums, and he was like dancing in his seat and really into it. So I appreciate that experience, kind of living it through his young eyes. But what do you think it means for maybe a Black child to go see a superhero film? Because I'm sure he's seen lots of superhero films by this point. What do you think that means to him and parents bringing their kids to something like that?
Well, I think it means a lot. I think the fact that we have to talk about it, that I'm being asked about it, shows that it's not the norm, it's the exception. Yeah. And I think the flip side of that is that every time a white child goes to a movie, they identify with the person. Even though the Incredible Hulk is green, they probably still think he's white. And other movies like that, although they, Pixar and others use, various colors for Shrek or whoever, but people don't think they're really a personal color because they're green or pink or whatever. Barney's white, Woodsy Owl is white. But it shows the preponderance of hero figures that white children get to see on the screen, on television, in real life, in stores, wearing badges, having offices, running for power. And so I think it points to the real thirst that the Black community has of seeing positive role models, and because we don't see enough of them even in our communities, that people actually run to the big screen to have this collective exhale to say, a Black hero who's proud to be Black and strong and is doing good things. It's heartening and disheartening at the same time. It's heartening because it's very beautiful, but then you walk away thinking, I won't have this reality in life, and I've got to return here on the IMAX to really experience this level of black level of beauty of celebrating the beauty of my blackness.
Yeah, I mean, we also get with this made up nation of Wakanda is not real, but this is a very positive view of African nation that was not affected by colonization or any of those factors. And so I think that's something else we haven't really seen on screen before, I would say. I mean, what's your view of that?
Being I'm a history buff and love reading about it and trying to learn from history, you tend to think of Marvel and these kinds of movies as a step away from reality. People don't really fly or become 50 times their own size. But I sat there thinking, is this where African nations were heading before colonization? So for me, it's not looking way in the future, because I don't expect people to fly like Superman or shoot webs out of their wrists like Spider-Man. But I looked at that movie thinking, man, I mean, we had some technology. Look at the pyramids, look at the societies, look at the ancient universities, look at, hieroglyphics. And so is this what life would have been like before colonialism and the meddling that outsiders brought? So again, the sort of bittersweet kind of thing, it was very encouraging, but I felt very, very sad, because I kept thinking this could have been. This could have happened, and I've never felt that in any other Avengers or Marvel movies. I don't think, this could really take place. Captain America is not going to really, be in ice forever and then come back to life. But that sense of sadness of what the world lost, and what children lost, and what young boys like the guy sitting next to you in the movie theater lost and won't have, was almost overwhelming for me in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes both ways. It is sort of bittersweet. We talked about Wonder Woman last year, and they had this island of just women that was very empowering, I think, for women. And I think in a similar sense, this can sort of be something that people can kind of envision. It gives them an inspiration of like what could be, and also brings to light how it didn't develop that way.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, hopefully it's somewhat of an inspiration.
It is. What's interesting, and this has happened with history, but it's happening in present day scenarios as well, particularly with African Americans. When there was strides made after the Emancipation Proclamation or during Reconstruction, the backlash of the KKK and the NRA and other kinds of things to really, law enforcement help keep black people in place, the proliferation of those responses happened in response to blacks making progress. Separate but equal happened as blacks were making progress. And so I was discouraged by when Wonder Woman came out. My daughter obviously is African American, but loved the movie Wonder Woman because of the empowerment of women. So she's frustrated. I'm frustrated because men were upset that women were organizing women-only viewings of that. It's like, we have enough places to go. We have country clubs. We have Rotary. We have things that we can do that's guys only. But just the fact that women are saying we want to do this on our own, that just seems so weak. And so the pushback with Black Panther, well, why were there only just two main white characters, and what's up with this, and what's the language, and what's the symbolism, and why is it okay for you to do the Wakanda Forever thing, and I'm not supposed to, and that's not really a hard and fast rule, it's just sort of an understanding. But the response to that, so you're making a great point, Eli, that I'm very encouraged, but then when you read this negative stuff in response to something that is like monumental, it's history making, and then people are just on the side like, pissing and groaning and just saying, oh, this isn't right, and why do black people have to do this? And that's just weird. I mean, like, so folks get to run the whole world, and then you have, a 115-minute flick, and then white guys are freaking out. The women have Wonder Woman, and men are freaking out because they want to go to a movie where women are just trying to gather and process stuff. So what's up with white men and that kind of stuff? I know it's your show and your interview, but
we've talked about that, and we don't know either.
We won't go down that road. But wow.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I can answer that, but I mean, there's like anytime people are asked to give up privilege in like some sort of abstract sense, they're like, the privilege, responds to that. But it's also like I think I don't know, as a white man, like I know that half the stuff I get, it's like I didn't earn it. You know, like I walk into a store and they're like, oh, he's cool, and then like a black man walks in and they're like eyeing him up a little different. I'm like, I see what you're doing. I didn't not commit crimes to like do this. I just showed up, and I think when something like this comes up, when there's a little bit of conflict, it just calls that totally fragile absurdity of privilege into question.
Yeah, you just answered it for me. That's
and then
good.
It's like, you know, and then the white fragility is not just so much how I feel about it, but it's like it literally falls apart because there's not much to hold it together.
Right. Right, because if we're going to have an all-white male showing,
we totally
12 Angry Jurors or whatever, whatever the movie is, some Orson Welles movie or something like that, then we'd be called racist, and so it's
one of the more inspiring things I've heard recently on the news is like some of the kids in California, kids in Florida, like responding to like the gun stuff,
right?
And like there's this one young lady who gave this speech. It's like we hear that like more guns are gonna save lives, and like we call BS. And there's this whole series of her saying these things. There's some point that like all of this discourse of privilege it's just bunk. Yeah. Like and there's all kinds of insidious narratives and watchwords, personal responsibility, all this
dog
stuff.
whistle stuff.
Right, yeah, it works. The system, they're like antibodies to have the system work.
Yeah.
But at some point, it's just bunk.
Yeah.
And we all know that.
Right.
Like we all know that I have to assert my privilege at some point, or it'll go away.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I hear you.
So speaking kind of like the system and how some of these things are coming to the surface, and you may know about it, but it's not in the general knowledge. Right. But I saw an article recently quoting Ava Duvernay, who has The Wrinkle of Time coming out soon, which is the most money given to not just a woman but a black woman to make a blockbuster film. And Black Panther made more money in its first weekend than Justice League made in its entire American run. So a lot of people
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy.
The Justice League movie is trash.
Absolutely. That is part of it, yes. But still, there's, these large name superheroes in that film that draw a lot of people.
Sure.
So a lot of people are saying, well, this is a huge win, which it is for, I think, people of color.
Sure.
But she was at an event for W Hotels where she was speaking. And so she made some comments, and, she was really saying that these are moments that are not sustainable unless there's systemic change. We sit on top of a broken system. Unless there is systemic change, we're just the sparkly stuff on top of that makes people feel good. And what she's referring to is, people are starting to name, Ryan Coogler made Black Panther. Barry Jenkins made Moonlight, which was quite a big hit last year. Dee Reese made Mudbound, which was a Netflix film this year. But she's saying, this is the amount of people you can count on one hand. Right. This is not even normal. This is not really that big of a change. We're just talking about this. So, I think you would probably agree, but maybe you can talk more about this. Like, this is a good step, but we can't just say like, well, now we have black representation in blockbuster films or something.
Sure,
we're good.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's a very accurate observation, but I think that there's some onus both that she has as a movie maker and also on the system or Hollywood or the whole film making machinery.
Yeah.
Is that it used to be said that if you make a movie with a black protagonist, people won't really come. Tyler Perry proved that wrong. People make fun of Tyler Perry's Medea characters, but Tyler made billions because he proved that black people would go to movies. I remember when Tyler Perry was doing plays, and we would actually have gatherings, from our organization, and we'd drive to Chicago in vans to go see plays. And so we watched that evolution. But people just sort of wrote it off as buffoonery. But those dollars at the box office, were not buffoonery. He wasn't being nominated for Oscars, but he was buying islands. Yeah. And there are a lot of people who own Oscars but don't own islands. And so I think others started really listening to it. So what I'm finding, I'm not a filmmaker, but as a community leader, I have a responsibility to not only challenge the system, but where I have it within my power, I've got to develop black leaders. I've got to hire black leaders. I've got to find a way to negotiate with their bosses to put them on loan to me. I've got to, I run an emerging leadership program for African-American influencers because I have a responsibility of bringing others along. Now, what's tough and I'm sure Ava will experience this and others, is that when you at the top of your game, Shonda Rhimes and others, you're trying to crank out your episodes and you're trying to be this trailblazer. It's hard to pause and then teach people what you're doing. And so if we're not very careful, we play into the system by becoming the Jackie Robinson, the Jesse Owens, the MLK Jr. We become the first one in, and then are so busy trying to negotiate and fight the demons that are out there and break through the red tape, that if we don't write what we've done and teach what we've done, if we don't find a way to build academies to bring people along, there becomes an issue. And so one of the ways that I work at eradicating systems of injustice where I work is by bringing along white allies, but strengthening black partners. And I think you got to do both ends. So my response would be, definitely, there's a very systemic issue that's going on. But I also say, let's celebrate A Wrinkle in Time. Let's celebrate moonlighting. Let's celebrate Moonlight. Let's celebrate these things that are happening, because this is historic. Yeah. When you look back over the last 2 or 3 years, this is really, really historic. And so celebrate it and then speak out. But let's leverage some of the resources. I mean, there's a lot of money behind Black Panther and these other movies. Yeah. So let's start a motion picture school that rivals USC's movie program that brings in the young John Singletons and the Spike Lees and the young filmmakers. Let's bring those folks in, and the artists, and let's develop them. But I'm not going to wait I didn't wait for my child's kindergarten teacher to teach her about Black history. And we need to stop begging Hollywood to make Black movies. Take this money. You know, Bollywood is not asking us to do this. And then what's the third largest filmmaker? Is it Nigeria? There's a huge Hollywood. I think it's Nigeria, but it's like Hollywood, Bollywood. There's a place in Nigeria where they're making all these individual flicks, and it got beautiful Black people in it, and they're strong in their characters, and they're not villains. But they just said, we're not going to ask Hollywood to do us. We're going to do ourselves. And when we were separate but equal, Black people did Black people. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we going to keep asking white people to fully understand, challenge them, and then give us money to challenge you? People typically don't fund to have their hand bitten when it's feeding you. So we've got to be really creative. Black Panther has made more movie than some third world countries has as their GNP. Right. And so let's take that stuff up and not just make white Hollywood richer. You know, again, to Tyler Perry's point, he's making his movies out in Atlanta. He's employing Black people and utilizing Black people. Again, we may not like the final product, but his process is pretty fantastic. So I say we have an opportunity with that voice and that platform to challenge the systemic realities, but then Oprah, Ava, Jenkins, others, let's do something different and duplicate yourself and bring up the next generation of folks who can do this.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, especially Ava Duvernay is using her voice with some of these successes to really speak out on these issues and support other Black filmmakers and give rise to that. That does kind of reflect, I think, a little bit in the film, a little bit, not an issue I had, but I was a little confused until the very final moments where they did address it. But people are saying this is one of the most complex and well-written villains in a film. Yes. That you really get his background and perspective and know where he's coming from. And it's complex. Sure. It really brings up some things about that sort of Wakanda nation that they need to address. And I didn't know if they were going to kind of polish over it. But then in those final moments, they do kind of open themselves up to, we can have an influence in the rest of the world and not just keep that to ourselves. Sure. But I was wondering if you pulled anything out of that or how you viewed it when you were watching the film.
I did. I processed it a bit with my daughter, who probably should have, leaned more into film study because she loves doing this, so she can just analyze a movie like crazy. But she said the same thing, though. She mentioned that that the Killmonger character was so complex. So I think what the beauty of the movie is that it created atmosphere or an environment where we could talk about the pride in being Black and our heritage and the beauty of culture. You'll probably get to this, but just the strength of women and the role of women in there was very, very powerful. But I also, it's even though the two main male characters are probably similar in age, you still sort of have the old school homeland kind of perspective, and then Killmonger representing sort of the Black urban perspective, because there's not just one ism. So there's race, we've got to affirm that, but they could have been more powerful had they really worked together to understand that that technology had to be shared. But what I think we also have to consider is, what was the fear? We just kept thinking, if people find out, we'll have to share Wakanda with everyone. But what were they really saying? Were they really saying, if we find out, the Rosses of the world are going to come in and colonialize us, and then compromise our culture, and so you can't really fault them for not wanting the whole world to come in, because what happens is people, like Holster about, blood diamonds. It's not like people love Africans or African people, but they love the soil because they love the diamonds. Yeah. And so when they come in and just rape the community just to take everything that it needs. And so to see that complexity of what happens, of the struggle, like, do we stay to ourselves? Do we share what we have? Is a very real struggle. Can I serve my family and be a mentor and a role model to someone else? Do I put all my energy in trying to protect my four walls, or do I have enough to be an uncle, a godfather, a mentor to the broader community? So I thought that was extremely complex, but equally brilliant to be able to weave that into the theme where you have gender roles being juxtaposed right in front of us. I don't think they make an Oscar that is able to capture and reward the brilliance of that movie. And if they're completely shunned, I understand why, because it's just outside their league. But that there are just too many things that are addressing issues that's just killing our world attitudinally and philosophically, and they just bring it up right in front of you.
Well, there's one thing. There's a lot of I love the film. There's a lot of things that I want to talk about, but one of the things I wanted to point out and ask you about was this. So one of the things I was really happy that I didn't see was, I could imagine a white person making this film, and it's 1650 and there are slave traders going into Africa, and someone's like, why isn't Wakanda helping? And then the whole movie is about their failure to save Africa from slavery, and there's 3 seconds of that in the film. So one thing I like about it is how, in one sense, how forward-looking it is. It's not about what white people think about Africa. It's about a whole different story. So, but the thing I wanted to mention was, if I'm contrasting two things historically, you have a small country that has a technological advantage and a whole lot of weaponry. I compare it to England, right? And so there's T'Challa's or T'Chaka's and the other elders' perspective of not getting involved. It's not our way, he says. And part of that, I saw a grand nobility. Because what England did was we'll just go conquer all the world. We've got lots of guns and ships and all kinds of other stuff. And Wakanda didn't do that. And in the film, it's not perfect, certainly, because they let down a lot of people. And we started in Oakland in 1994, I think, right at the epicenter of a whole lot of stuff. But there was a whole big, way in which it opened up my mind to different histories. What would not so much what would the world have been in this fictional world of Wakanda, but what would the world have been if the British Empire actually was benevolent, and wasn't well, yes, we're benevolent a little bit, but mostly we're going to take your stuff and enslave you and tell you you're horrible and do all that other stuff. What would our world look like? We
wouldn't have third world nations.
Yeah.
Because part of what happens is it just creates disparity and poverty, and so what we think of as third world countries or reality probably would not be a reality if a country like England with weaponry and rich history and wealth had been benevolent, because there is a responsibility with power, and it is to share and uplift and to help. And when we use that inappropriately, it's just really wrong. It's bad.
No, I was going to say, just comment that maybe that's somewhat of a reflection of America, too, which we feel like in a lot of narratives we were started for, religious freedom and freedom of every individual to pursue their happiness. But that's certainly not the actual history that happened as we plowed over many Native people. Right. And
it was not slavery. A value that we followed.
No, by any means.
We love the rhetoric, but we...
Yeah, it's great PR. Yes, we are here for the good of all people. Please,
that's right. Please get out of the way, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I just wanted to know, in general, too, your experience of watching the film. Sounds like you went with your daughter, but we just haven't talked about general, your experience of watching.
Well, it was I loved the movie. A group of about 6 white people came in late. So I actually missed the first 4 minutes of the movie. So I didn't understand some of what happened in Oakland because because we got there early because we knew it was going to be busy.
Yeah.
But it's like this parade of folks. At one point, I just said, "Hey, hurry up!" So I've got to see it again to understand the setup. So that was frustrating. Like, you can't come into a black movie all late and all white. The other thing is, I love the end because what I felt T'Challa was showing was, we have something to share. We want to share. We want to become a world player. But in a moment, at the end, I really identify with him. And it's because the thought is that if you're black and you're a leader, you're a black leader. Like, what do you have to share with the world? What could you possibly know? What could you possibly see? So that's a very real attitude where black leaders and influencers are wanting to be relegated to black movies or black reality. And but we're people too. We're American too. We live also. We have issues about clean water and clean air and politics and leadership. And so that arrogance is very, very real. And we'll talk to you about race stuff because that's where you're an expert. But don't come talking to us about how to run a nation or run a city or manage a budget or change a school. And so that piece I really take to heart because that's a real pressure. You're a world leader. You're a world power. You have all of this stuff going for you. They should be, leaning on their elbows and their chins and their palms, listening to this guy taking notes, and they're thinking, "What do you possibly have to offer?" And I think a lot of black innovators experience that attitude on a regular basis. I thought that was a beautiful but sad depiction of what life is like.
There's I don't remember who says it, but I think at one point someone says to T'Challa, didn't life start in Africa? So aren't you really the king of everybody?
Right.
And he's that. I mean, what it seems like he faces him with is this challenge to T'Challa. Like, are you just gonna take care of Wakanda, or are you gonna somehow find a way to be magnanimous enough to help everybody?
Now, to his defense, part of the one pressure that I experience as a leader who happens to be black is that people will say, "Okay, you're doing this work, Alex. I have this movement called Justified Anger. Well, what about the Southeast Asian people?" And I said to the white person who asked me that, "Well, what are you doing about it? Because you're probably just as close to being Southeast Asian as I am. Mm-hmm. So because I understand black urban inner city issues, black middle class issues, I'm supposed to understand, Hmong. I understand the geography and the background of Laos. Like, what are you saying?" So there is this pressure that if you want to do something that really strengthens the black community, there is pressure that you're being short-sighted and you should be bringing things to bear to the whole broader community. Well, what about the Latinos and what about the LGBT community? What about? So it's almost as if as a black leader, I cannot just focus on black issues because it's not fair to just use my blackness on black people. So what about when I don't feel like I have properly exerted all my opportunities or privilege or know-how on the issues that strengthen the black community. So there's a constant bombardment of distractors that say, "Hey, come here, be on this committee, be on this plan, be on this, talk to us about this." So I can relate to that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just wanted to mention that what I appreciated is what you talk a lot about is like white allies and kind of joining in your mission. And we had the one character played by Martin Freeman. I think it was Everett Ross was the character, but he kind of gets pulled along into things and brought into Wakanda unknowingly, and so he becomes sort of an ally of this nation and the heroes that we see. And I thought that was kind of a cool depiction. And then the first time we see him in this film, he's very much like, I'm from America, so we're going to kind of handle this if you could kind of step aside and not get in our way. I understand you have something good going here, but we know how to handle this, so please stay out of the way.
You're being generous. I would still call him a would-be ally.
Okay.
I would say he was a helper. So I think
yeah.
an ally is an attitudinal change. Mm-hmm. So I think, they probably want him to arrive at that point.
Yeah.
But I think when someone, he certainly was thinking he was calling the shots and leading the parade. And so he just sort of found out inadvertently through their strength that he didn't really know what he knew. He wasn't really calling the shots. But I don't know if he really came to the place of understanding they've got to really do this and I'm being supportive. He did some things that's very helpful.
Yeah.
But the way I think of allies is that they walk into a situation realizing I'm not running this. I don't know what's best. And they learn to lead with that. And so I think they ascribe into him a sense of allyship that I'd love to have seen develop more. I loved his character and how that developed, but I just think to say in the real world, that word ally is thrown around very loosely, that if someone flanks, if I'm flanked by them, whether they're doing something I like or don't want, they're still an ally. Well, Alex, I'm here. But when you get that they've set an agenda, they've got the expertise, they've got the power and the technology, and I'm talking down to them like they're the hired help.
Yeah.
That takes a while to shift. And I think that's when a person really becomes an ally.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's a little surface level, but I like at that last scene at the end you're talking about where they kind of say, we're going to show them. They say, well, what do you have to offer? And we get that quick shot of him smiling because he knows what's going on. So I think it is, bringing people into proximity of communities that they're not used to, that they can learn from the inside and kind of see the difference. So I agree. He's on a path.
Definitely.
To seeing that. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. And one thing we haven't talked much about, but I'll just say my daughter loved the role of the women in the movie. Absolutely. Right. So there's a cultural thing, but she just talked about women not needing to be rescued. She loved the fact that they're standing in front of humongous rhinoceros. Anyway, that part was very affirming. So I think Black men were affirmed in a lot of ways. Black people were, but Black women really were, and the relationship between Black men and Black women.
Yeah, they often called out the men too.
You're right.
On what they should be doing.
You're right. It was very beautiful. So I enjoyed it. It makes me realize that I want to see it a few more times to just dissect it a little bit. I'm thinking about either doing a lecture series on some of the key points or sort of a sermon series or something. But there are pieces I want to bring out that I think are relatable. But I think what I would do with my white would-be allies is to ask people to go see it and then let's meet up someplace and then, for maybe 3 or 4 weeks, talk about some of the key points and how it relates to a Black worldview and just do some work around it. Because I think we have to use artistic forms like that to educate people. Because right now we've been looking back on history and trying to understand the current events. That's a little bit more artistically complicated. And I think it gives us a chance to sort of be still in time and dissect it in a way that could be really useful. And just talking with you about it is making me think, I want to go sit down and write out what a 5-part discussion like that would be like and offer that up in the community. Yeah,
that's great. Well, thanks for being with us, Alex. We really appreciate your point of view and talking through this film with us.
Oh, no, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.